Morning, everybody. For those of you that I don't know, my name's Joanna Parker, and I work as the Group Asbestos Lead at Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust. So here today, this morning, I'm going to talk to you about clearance certificates and clearances themselves from a client's perspective. Some of it's my opinion, some of it's opinions of colleagues that I work with directly or other asbestos managers that I know personally who I've asked when I was volunteered to give this session this morning. What do clients want? Okay, simple question. I think some of you think that this is what we want sometimes, the moon on a stick. But in reality, I think a lot of us, all we actually really want is confirmation that the asbestos is gone. It's the biggie, isn't it? Or that it's been remediated as what we asked for. You know, that's the big thing. We want reassurance that what we're doing is worked out. Secondary to that, and what's really important for us, because obviously we have the responsibility to manage anything that remains, any risks that still exist, is we want to know what they are, and we want that to be clear so we can deal with it appropriately going forward. Also, we'd like to know about any issues that were encountered on site by you guys, any challenges, any decisions that were made to help inform us about what's going forward. But we want something that's simple to understand as well. I'm quite an educated client, but a lot of the clients that are out there are not. They want something that's written in plain English that's quite clear and obvious for them to interpret. We want something that's going to give us the legal sign off that we need. And quite often we want it to be able to provide that to other people. Often when we do jobs, we've got other contractors, maybe not even people from our own organisation that are going into these areas afterwards. So we want something that we've got faith in to pass on to them for their reassurance too. But essentially, we want what we've asked for and what we've paid for. Doesn't seem like a big ask. And if we can get value for money as well, that would be absolutely great. So what does good look like in terms of clearances and the paperwork that comes with it? Again, no big surprises. We want something that's technically correct, something detailed, something that's understandable, something legally compliant, and something accurate. Not challenging, okay, right? So a big part of that, obviously, is making sure that we decide what we're going to do before the job starts. So as it says there, planning still a good thing to do first, and that's absolutely true when it comes to clearances. Put up there first, make sure it's what the client actually wants or needs. And it might seem like an obvious statement, but some asbestos removal jobs are quite simple. Either the asbestos is there or it's gone. So where's the argument? What's difficult about that? But when it comes to jobs such as thermal insulation, contamination, or spray coating, the things that are really difficult to remove, how many jobs where you've got thermal insulation residues have you done recently where there was no risk remaining? Unless it's a demolition job or a back to shell kind of project, the reality is there's always going to be something left. How many of you actually communicate that with the clients up front and give them a really informed sort of discussion about any risks that they'll be left with at the end of that project? From our point of view, what's driving the project makes a big difference to how far we'll go as well. So again, if we're doing the work to facilitate maintenance, it might be quite urgent that we get it done in quite a short time frame. We probably don't have the luxury of time. So although it would be great in an idealistic world to remove everything to the nth degree and it'd be brilliant and great, maybe we just need to do just enough to get that urgent piece of maintenance work done. Or on the flip side of that, it might be part of a capital scheme. So we have got the luxury of time. There's more funding. We want a holistic, complete removal job. But unless you have the discussion with us and understand why we're doing that work, is it possible for you to advise us on what the scope should be for those types of projects? We want you to think about what we do as a client, how our organisations work. So for myself, I work in a hospital environment. So all our sites are inherently public facing. We have open doors where people can walk in and walk to all the areas. So therefore for us, we really need to segregate all our works. We can't just rely and say, send an email to all our staff and say, don't go to this wing of the building because we've got works going on. We have random people who are walking off the street who could go anywhere. We really need to segregate what we do. So think about what your clients do, what their properties are like in terms of how you help plan the works for them in terms of the setup and things like that. Something we come across quite commonly is where we get consultants involved to scope work. Idealistically, you guys want to do everything and go to the nth degree and spend all our money that we don't have. That is not always possible for us, okay? What is driving our policies and procedures? Are we trying to get somewhere asbestos free, or are we trying to do enough just to comply and survive? We'd like to remove everything, but realistically, can we dismantle lots of structures in our buildings to facilitate a full removal? Can we cut all the plant and equipment out of a live hospital? We can't do that. So think about how we're going to deal with what you're asking us to do. Specifications for me is a real big thing. I think it's an area in the asbestos sector that's undervalued by a lot of clients personally. I think for you guys as consultants, it's a real opportunity for you to have another piece of work that you sell to people, because it needs pushing with more people. If you clearly define the scope up front, it means a lot less comebacks for us, a lot better organisation of jobs. We insist on it for every single removal project that we do at our sites because we think it's absolutely invaluable. And again, things like site visits before removal works. Again, I think it's something that should be pushed with more clients. A lot of clients perhaps don't understand the importance of that, but allowing an analyst or an analytical company to look at the job while it's being planned inherently leaves us with less caveats at the end of the project. So again, it's something that I wish it was a legal requirement. I wish it was something that was pushed more, but it's something that hopefully you guys can try and educate more of your clients as being a really important thing to be better for them. And this is tricky, without getting too political. Again, for any kind of projects where it's being led by the licensed contractor, this is inherently difficult to do. And personally, I would welcome a world where licensed contractors couldn't directly employ analytical companies purely for this reason. Because I think that there's a lot of clients out there who go through this route, maybe just because it's easier to employ one contractor rather than two separately. You probably don't end up with the work that they thought they were going to get through that route. So the next thing I want to talk about, reasonably practicable. What a wonderful phrase. So the definition that's up there was first set out by the Court of Appeal in a legal case in 1949. And reasonably practicable, it's a narrower term than physically possible, okay? So a computation must be made by the owner in which the quantum of risk is placed on one scale and the sacrifice involved, the measures necessary for averting the risk, whether that's money, time or trouble, is placed on the other. And that, if it's shown, there's a gross disproportion between them, the risk being insignificant related to the sacrifice, the defendant discharged the owner from. So is it going to cost too much, take too long, be too difficult? Oh, we're not going to do it. But is that an appropriate phrase to apply to a lot of clearance certificates? Because it's a phrase that we read on a lot of clearance certificates that we get back. I mean, by the very nature of clearances, can we confirm that every single asbestos fibre is gone? So should we put this phrase in? But in reality, the analyst is making this decision, but we, the client, inherit that risk back. Is it for them to make that decision for the risk that we're ultimately going to be responsible for after that job? So a couple of examples here to talk further about reasonably practicable. If the scope of the works is to remove all the asbestos and the job's appropriately planned, there shouldn't be any place for this phrase, right? Seems fair to me. And for a lot of jobs like AIB, should AIB be being removed as far as reasonably practicable? I would argue not. It's either there or it's gone. It should be quite simple. And the other thing is, you've got to think back to what the scope of the work is. If the scope of the work says it's to remove all the asbestos, this phrase shouldn't be creeping in there. We think back to what it said about what's physically possible or what's reasonably practicable. If the scope of work is to do what's physically possible, you shouldn't be putting this phrase on there. It doesn't matter if it takes the removal contractor too long, or it's going to be another week, or it's too difficult, more equipment's needed. If they said they're going to do it, that's the way it should be. Now, there are always exceptions. I've got a couple of examples here. This seems a strange one, but this is a clearance certificate piece of work that we had done where we had AIB in a door hinge plate on the floor. Really simple, small job, really small enclosure. And we got back a clearance certificate that had the phrase reasonably practicable about 5 times in the clearance comment for that piece of work. What the hell? That's just absolutely ridiculous, and it shouldn't have been there. However, on the flip side, if you've got a job where it's remove lumps and bumps as far as possible from a plant room for thermal insulation, absolutely that would be a reasonable place to put that kind of comment in. And other situations as well, if you come across something unsafe, you come across damaged electrical cables where it wouldn't be appropriate to send the analyst in, absolutely, the comment's fine in there. And again, things like where you've got rough floors within enclosure, it's taken as far as possible and inspected as far as possible. That would be fair. So the next thing I want to talk about is floor plans. So this is probably one of the last hand-drawn ones. We're all moving into the electronic world now. Everything, in theory, should be getting better, right? With nice electronic drawings and not spidery affairs like this thing here. But yeah, the analyst guide tells you what the minimum content of sort of floor plans could be, or what they should demonstrate, you know. And I was always drummed into me as an analyst. There is a list of about 10 things you have to make sure that all your clearance drawings have this on. They've got to have an airlock, they've got to have a bag lock, transit route, waste route, negative pressure unit. Make sure all those things are on there. Make sure it's a key, make sure it's clear. Is that particularly clear to you guys? In our estate with 30 buildings on it, any idea where that would be if you were just given that and a chance to walk around by yourself? It's pretty tricky. We never get enough context on enclosure drawings, and over time, things in an estate like ours, it changes quite significantly. They might decide to rename buildings, renumber everything. Even the layouts change. If you don't give us enough, historically, when we go back and try and find these records, we can't place it in space and time. It's really difficult. But yeah, plans should be accurate. Obviously, does it represent what's on site? If you've got client issued plans, use them if you can, or use them to copy. If you haven't got them, ask for them. Nearly all clients have them. It makes it a lot easier for you guys. And something else, multiple plans. When I was an analyst, it was quite common that you'd have to put multiple plans in, because you can get your enclosure on one plan quite clearly, but can you get all your transit and waste routes on there? It's notoriously difficult to squeeze everything onto one plan. Yet analysts endlessly try. We endlessly get one single plan in a clearance certificate, which doesn't give us the full layout, doesn't cover all the things that it's supposed to show at all. And something else since the addition of electrical digital clearance certificates that seems to have disappeared. I was always told to put remaining asbestos on plans within clearance certificates as well. And I don't know if it's how these get embedded into a certificate with a timestamp on now, with them being electronic. And quite often any remaining asbestos is something that would be put on a floor plan at stage 4, perhaps at the end. Just doesn't seem to happen anymore. We don't seem to get any remaining asbestos left on our floor plans in clearance certificates. And that for us is quite often the easiest way, particularly within large complicated enclosures, to be able to identify where it is. So just a couple of examples. I'll put this in because I hate this. This is a pet hate for me. So if you've got a removal contractor on site and your analyst comes to site, I'll just take a picture of their plan in their methodology, and I'll put it in your clearance certificate. I always thought the understanding was that an analyst should independently verify what the scope of the work was, and if they're not drawing their own diagram, this kind of laziness for me, it's easy to miss any subtle changes. And are the analysts actually independently verifying it if they're just photographing what's in the contractor's method statement? I'd argue that they probably aren't. Plus, you can't see anything, can't read any room numbers, you can't even read what the descriptions are, you can't see what the key is. And from my experience, the removal contractors are not always very good at drawing drawings either. So you're probably doing yourself a disservice by using the one that they put in there too. So again, just to highlight context, so you can see this one here. This is what came in the clearance certificate. A nice floating box. You've got a couple of rooms nearby, and they've got room numbers in it, which is great. But would you have ever guessed that the room in red, that's where it was? Yeah, not particularly clear. And transit route, well, I don't know where that is because that's not in there. Again, clearance certificate. There we go. Next, comments and caveats. So you don't need to read the detail of this. It's quite a detailed comment in the first one. But what I'd like to draw your attention to is that it just stops mid-sentence at the end there and drops off a cliff. There is no extension box of comments. There's no site diary that came with it where this comment was finished. Maybe they said something really important after this, but we'll never know because it's not anywhere else. But on the flip side of that, you also get this. Nothing in there. I was always taught as an analyst, this is a box and you don't want to put anything in it. You strike through it or you write NA, because did they forget to write anything, or was there nothing to write? Just to clarify that point sometimes makes all the difference. I'm being a bit harsh here. I'm saying with one hand, don't write too much, or don't write nothing at all. Good luck. It's tricky, I know. But what I would say is that comments should be commensurate with the projects. And I think it's very rare from my experience that you go to a clearance unless it's unless it's a boiler cupboard for the 50 millionth time on the same estate where everybody knows what they're doing and everything's similar, there's typically always something to say from my experience somewhere. So it's very strange to see anything come back with no comments in at all. But what I would say from a client's perspective is it can be really difficult to pick out key information from that clearance certificate. Quite threatening, isn't it? So yeah, be specific about where the asbestos is. If it's large enclosures, give us a lot of detail. But all instances should be documented. Don't just say, oh, there's gaskets in there. Well, how many? You know, where are they? What have you done to them? Okay. Please don't reference previous certificates and go, oh, the remaining asbestos is this as per the previous survey that was undertaken. Give us the detail in the clearance certificate. We need a one place, one stop document to help us update our records. And another thing as well, us as an organisation, we do not routinely label our asbestos products. It's a management tool that we don't use in our asbestos management plan. So don't come and do a 4-stage clearance and then tell us you've labelled all the remaining asbestos on our site, because that'll go against what our management procedures are, which can undermine the principles and the things that we train our staff to expect when they come to our site. So a couple more examples now. Photographs, what a welcome addition. I love a photograph in a clearance certificate. I think there's a massive improvement for us. And the analyst guide gives you a definition of what should be included in these. So visual confirmation of a thorough, suitable, proportionate and identifiable photographic evidence. Can you hand on heart say that the photographs that you get in clearance certificates meet that requirement? There's a lot of minimum content which is defined, so we get lots of pictures of transit routes, airlocks, baglocks. The standard things, there's a tick list of about 4 or 5 items per stage, and that's what we get. But another thing is they should be captioned and they should be sufficiently detailed to enable close examination. Once those photographs are embedded in a clearance certificate, you zoom in, you cannot undertake any close inspection and interrogation of those photographs. Let's be honest, it's just not possible. So in terms of the quality of the pictures we get as well, we get lots of dark images. They had a good job doing that visual, look at that, by torchlight. Obviously lots of light in there to do it. As soon as you blow the picture up, well, wow, that looks even worse here than it does on my screen as a presentation. That's a plant room, by the way. That's out of a clearance certificate. Obviously, in the clearance certificate, it was this big, but that's not particularly clear. And again, things lacking in context. That's great. We know it's an issue. It looks like debris, but where is it? What is it of? From our perspective, we'd really appreciate more context views so we can really understand the scope of the areas that were included in the enclosure. So general shots are really useful for us to understand where it was. It would be really nice to get a completion pack of high resolution photographs. I understand the challenges embedding them in the document itself, but send us through a pack of photos afterwards as well. That would be really good. And something that one of the clients that I know has requested is that the location of photographs are actually marked on the floor plans too, to aid them in being able to identify where these things are. So this one's pretty entertaining. So 5 minutes, brilliant. So this is a real life journey of an analyst who came to do a job for us somewhere I worked not so long ago. So it's a bit of a Gantt chart. They obviously issued this analyst a kit and a DeLorean to travel through time to do his clearance because it was physically impossible what he actually did. So the brown at the bottom, that's the entire clearance. So stage 1 took a massive 5 minutes, which is interesting because it was a small, simple AIB job, but the enclosure was on the 3rd floor and the decon unit and the skip were in this car park at the back of the building on the ground floor. So in 5 minutes, they managed to traverse 3 floors, up and down the stairs, check everything, fill the paperwork off and sign it out, which is some moving for me. The visual took a reasonable amount of time, stage 2, but all of stage 2 was exactly the same duration as the visual time. So there was no time to account for anything else. Stage 3 starts and the 2 lines above it, these are the clearance air tests. Both of them started at exactly the same time. Always a bit of an alarm for me when all your air tests go on at exactly the same time and come off at exactly the same time. But after the pumps came off, there was a full 14 minutes before he signed off stage 2. So again, he walked down from the 3rd floor to his 1st floor office after decontaminating himself with his pumps, obviously. mounted them and counted them and filled in his paperwork in 14 minutes flat. But it gets worse than that. We get the DCU clearance as well. We had to estimate 10 minutes for the visual because they didn't actually write how long it took in the paperwork at all. So we'll give him 10 minutes. But then they put the sampling pump on. In the decontamination unit, at exactly the same time they were taking the pumps off in the enclosure. They also had some non-licensed works to do as well on the certificate of cleanliness. So there were 3 other areas that they did 3 air tests in, but they signed off the certificate of cleanliness before the final air test had finished. This is terrible, right? But it still happens. And we're an educated client. They know that we check everything. And this is still what we got back. You know, it's really disappointing. So just a couple more examples of some technically incorrect stuff. If you're going to send us your certificate, check what your due date of your equipment is before the date when you actually did the job. If they don't match, please don't issue it. This is a clearance certificate. I haven't got a lot of time left, so I won't ask you to spot the difference. But last I heard, you needed more than 360 litres for a clearance air test and to get less than 0.01. And again, some great pictures in your clearance certificate, but the annotations, that's definitely not an airlock, a bag lock. You know, it's about getting analysts to quality check things before they issue it, because every little bit of mistake like this for us destroys our faith in the validity of that document that we look at. That's the reality. So as clients, what we really want is we want you to communicate with us. Sometimes we struggle to get certificates on time and swiftly. I know organisations who like to have them quality checked first. We'd like you to send analysts who don't need to have the work quality checked to come to our site. We should get that immediately, and quite often we need to get somebody in there immediately. Again, if it's an essential maintenance job, we need to get somebody in straight away, and they won't go unless we give them the paperwork. Explain what things mean. Again, within the paperwork, or give us a summary when you send the documents through, put it in an email. Let us know what it means if there's anything in there that's slightly confusing or difficult. Please request confirmation of changes to scope or caveats. If the removal contractor tells you it's agreed with us, ask them for evidence that they've confirmed it with us, because we don't know about a lot of these things until that piece of paperwork lands on our desk. And that's not fair or legal, really. But sometimes, you know, if it's longer jobs, give us updates and progress. There's no such thing as too much information. If you're going to be there for weeks, a weekly email would be lovely to know what's going on and whether things are on track or not. And the reality is, communicate any failures or issues. If things are going wrong with a licensed contractor, they are not going to tell us. And you guys also work for us. You are quite often our representatives on these jobs. Represent our interests when you're there. I know it can be difficult and challenging with removal contractors sometimes, but if you don't tell us what the challenges are, we just don't know. We don't find out. So a couple of extra bits. I know it's supposed to be about clearances, but for me, things that make a big difference. Site diaries. Do you issue these to your clients, or are these just for you? I like to get them, to be quite honest. But again, make sure you check them. If you've got somewhere to put the time, put it in. That's what it's for. But again, quality checking. So this is a job. KFO were on site, but then all of a sudden, Lilquest were there as well. Site diaries should not be a cut and paste exercise, but quite often when we do get them, we find that they can be. And just written in English. Third male toilet is because I arrived, said Yoda, doing air testing on one of our sites. But yeah, site diaries, I'd like them. If you don't issue site diaries, you know, quite often there's not a lot of space in clearance certificates to put a lot of comments in. This would be an ideal place to put extra information if you need to do it, because I know the formatting can be challenging in a digital certificate sometimes. And if you've got kind of situations where you've got clients who are uneducated, this is a really good place for you to put things in plain English, where you're not bound by the constraints of the accreditation in it. It's a useful document to use. And do you train analysts? Do you have standards for what they put in there? Because again, for us as the client, we'd like to know how many contractors are on site, what time did they arrive, did they all go home early, did they have a 2-hour lunch? Because they told us and gave us a price and said it was an 8-man job for 3 weeks. Yeah, you've been there every day and only 3 guys have turned up. Yet at the end of the job, we get told, oh, it's run over, we need an extra bill. You can be our eyes and ears and be our representatives on site if you put that detail in the diary, and it's really important for us. So, and the other one, I know there's a lot of talk about race to the bottom and how difficult it is to compete. Lots of companies out there doing clearances for a very, very cheap cost. So I can't solve that problem for you in reality, but what I would say is that, like Warren Buffett said, price is what you pay and value is what you get. It's not the same thing. You can still do a lot of work out there to make your service better than others. You might cost more money, but there's things that you can offer for very little cost or no cost to yourself that make a big difference to people like me, the client. So we talk about a basic analyst, a pump jockey. You know, they turn up, they can do 12 air tests in a day. They don't know, do they? They probably do about 8, maybe, and then they have a quiet afternoon and go home early. We get a lot of that. We get a lot of complaints as well because we have project managers who have this extra cost and something else they have to arrange. And they're like, why do we do full-time monitoring? Because we just, every time we go there, the analyst is drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, watching movies on his computer. Real tough sell for us to add the value of having full-time monitoring, and that's what people see at the other end. Whereas a good analyst can do things like site audits as a removal contractor. They can do enclosure inspections. They can document that, okay. They can do extra. These things cost you no extra money, but for us, add a massive amount of value in terms of the service that you provide. So I'm out of time now. So a big thing to think of, we think there's a lot of value in maybe having an executive summary for a clearance certificate as well, because the big things that we want to know about the risks and what we need are very often hidden in a clearance certificate, and bringing that to the front or having an accompanying information that goes along with it would help us endlessly as clients. Big requirement for us after we have that information is updating our records and filing things appropriately. But we just want you to think about what we do with that information, okay? We check it, we send it to others, we have to explain it to others, have faith in it. And quite often we have to pull it out and review it following sort of claims or HSE visits or